Imagine a country that isn't really a country, but a high-security insurance policy with a flag. Imagine a mountain fortress where the smell of chocolate and the sound of cowbells are merely the atmospheric theater for a global laundromat that processed the loot of the 20th century's greatest monsters. While the rest of Europe was being torn apart by the machinery of industrial slaughter, Switzerland was performing a different kind of miracle. They were converting the gold teeth and wedding rings of the dead into the neutral currency of the living. The Swiss didn't survive World War II because they were peaceful. They survived because they were indispensable. They turned their entire nation into a black box, where money had no history, no blood on it, and most importantly, no name. They weren't just the world's vault. They were the financial anesthetic for the Third Reich. They provided the liquidity that kept the Nazi war machine from grinding to a halt, and they did it while the world watched them as the island of peace. Welcome to the Historical Audit, where we find the missing pieces behind history's greatest events. To understand why Switzerland became the world's vault, you have to look at the mechanical origin of their silence. Most people think Swiss bank secrecy is an ancient tradition. It's not. It was a calculated response to the rise of totalitarianism. The year is 1934. The Nazis have just taken power in Germany, and they are facing a capital flight crisis. Jewish families, intellectuals, and political dissidents are desperately trying to move their wealth out of the country before the state can seize it. In response, the Gestapo launched a campaign of financial terror. They didn't just look for gold, they looked for information. They would pose as clients, use threats against bankers' families, and infiltrate foreign institutions to find out who had traitorous offshore accounts. Switzerland saw this and realized their entire national business model privacy was being audited by a foreign power. But instead of a moral protest, the Swiss responded with legislative armor. They passed the Federal Act on Banks and Savings Banks of 1934. This was the birth of total secrecy. For the first time, violating bank secrecy wasn't just a breach of contract. It was a criminal offense against the state. If a Swiss banker revealed an account holder's name to a German agent, they didn't just get a fine, they went to prison. The Swiss had built a digital firewall before computers even existed. They created a space where the state's power ended at the vault door. But here is the brutal irony that defines this audit. The law that was marketed as a humanitarian shield for the victims of the Nazis was the exact same law that would protect the perpetrators when the tide of the war turned. It was a neutral tool that worked for whoever held the key. It was the first financial cloaking device. By 1940, Hitler had a problem that every extraction empire eventually faces: the liquidity trap. The Nazis had looted the central banks of Europe, Poland, Belgium, the Netherlands, France. They had mountains of gold. But gold is heavy, and it's recognizable. If you try to pay for Swedish iron ore or Portuguese tungsten with Belgian gold, the world knows you've stolen it. Furthermore, the Nazi currency, the Reichsmark, was essentially trash money. It had no value outside the borders of the Reich. To buy the raw materials needed to build tanks and planes, Hitler needed a currency the world actually trusted. He needed Swiss francs. This is where the Swiss National Bank became the hidden engine of the war. They didn't just store gold, they monetized it. The mechanical flow was a masterpiece of cold efficiency. The Nazis would take gold from their victims not just from central bank vaults, but the meltdown gold from the concentration camps, watches, jewelry, even dental fillings. They would ship this gold to the Prussian mint, where it was remelted into standard bars and stamped with pre-war dates, usually 1938 or earlier. This was financial plastic surgery. It made the looted gold look like old reserve gold. This clean gold was then shipped to Bern. The Swiss National Bank would accept the bars and, in exchange, credit the Reichsbank with Swiss francs. The Nazis could then use those francs to buy the resources they needed from other neutral nations. Switzerland wasn't just a vault. They were the world's laundromat. Between 1940 and 1945, the Swiss National Bank processed nearly $400 million in Nazi gold, roughly $8 billion in today's money. The Swiss knew exactly where that gold was coming from. They were performatively unaware, but the ledgers don't lie. They were providing the lifeblood for a machine that was busy liquidating the very people the 1934 law was supposed to protect. Why didn't Hitler just invade? He had the troops. Switzerland was surrounded on all sides. The answer lies in the mechanical logic of utility. The Swiss military had a plan called the National Redoubt. They knew they couldn't win a border war against the Wehrmacht. So, they rigged every bridge, every tunnel, and every alpine pass with high explosives. They prepared to retreat into the mountains into the redoubt and leave the cities to the invaders. Their message to Hitler was, You can have our cities, but we will blow the Gottardo Tunnel and the Simplon Pass. You will lose your transit routes to Italy, and you will lose the neutral platform you need to buy your iron. We are worth more to you as a bank than as a province. Switzerland had created a poison pill. They had made themselves too useful to occupy. They were the Third Reich's only window to the global market. If Hitler marched into Bern, the window would shatter, and his war machine would suffocate from a lack of hard currency. This is the ultimate audit of neutrality. Neutrality isn't about peace, it's about geopolitical triage. It's about being the one person in the room that everyone hates but everyone needs. The Swiss survived because they were the financial safe zone for a world on fire. For 50 years after the war, the Swiss maintained the illusion of integrity. They were the home of the Red Cross. They were the arbiters of peace. But in the 1990, the missing pieces finally caught up with them. The audit revealed a darker layer of the vault logic. It turned out that thousands of accounts belonging to Holocaust victims had been anesthetized. When the heirs of these victims came to the banks in the 1950, they were met with a wall of procedural brutality. The banks demanded death certificates that obviously didn't exist for people murdered in the camps. The banks used the 1934 Secrecy Law as a shield to hide the money from the very people who owned it. They were waiting for the social memory to die out so they could absorb the unclaimed assets into their own profits. This wasn't just an administrative error. It was a systemic extraction. It took a massive international investigation, the Volcker Commission, to finally break the black box. In 1998, the Swiss banks were forced to pay a $1 billion settlement. It was a drop in the bucket compared to the decades of interest and the sheer volume of looted gold that had passed through their hands, but it served as the final audit of the Swiss myth. Now, we come to the modern mirror. We come to 2026. The world of the physical mountain vault is fading, but the mechanical logic of Switzerland is being reborn in the digital cloud. We are witnessing the second Swiss revolution, but this time there are no mountains. We have entered the era of programmable privacy. In a world where the global financial system has been weaponized, where central bank reserves are frozen at the touch of a button, and entire nations are severed from the SWIFT network, the concept of the neutral vault is evolving. It is migrating from the physical vaults of the past to the decentralized ledgers of the future, finding new homes in emerging neutral hubs like Dubai and Singapore. This shift represents a modern revival of the 1934 Act. Just as Switzerland once codified banking secrecy to protect capital from the chaos of 20th century Europe, decentralized finance and privacy coins are building a digital zone of silence. This isn't just technology. It is a shield that no government, not even the US Treasury, can easily audit or dismantle. However, privacy alone is not enough to ensure survival. To remain truly sovereign, these new hubs are setting a utility trap. In the same way Switzerland made itself too useful to invade, modern nations are leveraging their control over essential commodities from energy corridors to the production of microchips to achieve a sanction-proof status. They are becoming the indispensable middlemen of the 21st century gold rush, ensuring that to cut them off would be to wound the global economy itself. The final piece of this transformation is the digital redoubt. Wealth is rapidly migrating away from traditional bank accounts and into unhosted wallets. These are the digital bunkers of our age, the modern equivalent of a private vault hidden deep within the Alps. For those who hold the keys, it represents the ultimate opt-out from the global extraction machine, securing a level of financial autonomy that hasn't been seen in nearly a century. The Historical Audit of Switzerland teaches us that capital will always flow to the place where it is least visible. Whether it's 1940 or 2026, the demand for a black box never goes away. The only thing that changes is the technology of silence. Switzerland survived the Nazi gold rush by being the laundromat for the devil, proving that in the game of power there is no such thing as a bystander. You are either the person being robbed, the person doing the robbing, or the person holding the bag for a fee. The missing piece of history isn't just that Switzerland took the gold, it's that they built the very infrastructure that allowed the war to continue. They proved that a neutral machine can be just as deadly as a tank. If you want to know where the next vault is being built, don't look at the mountains. Look at the code. Look for the places where the audit isn't allowed to go, because that is where the real power is hiding. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe, share with your friends, and join the audit.